Montana Territory. Summer of 1879, the wind carried wildfire ash from the east, and the girl in the corner of the stagecoach never looked up. The wheels creaked through the dusty road as the coach pulled into the small town of Red Elk Crossing. She sat stiff, hands folded over a scuffed leather bag, shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face, but even without it she would not have met anyone's gaze. Across the street, a man leaned against the hitching post outside the dry goods store. His boots were worn, spurs quiet. He had the kind of stillness that came from years in the saddle waiting, watching, knowing when to move. His name was Kade Prescott, and he noticed her the moment the coach door swung open. She stepped down like she had forgotten how to use her legs. A worn gray dress clung to her frame, dust settled into every hem. She turned her face away from the driver's offer of help, and when a passing ranch wife smiled and said hello, she flinched like she had been struck. She did not look at anyone. Kade did not move from his spot. He just watched as she crossed the road, her boots dragging, and disappeared into the back room of the boarding house. Mrs. Martin, the widow who ran the place, nodded once at Kade across the street. He tipped his hat in return. Inside, the girl gave her name in a voice barely louder than the wind, Odessa Jameson. "She's alone," Mrs. Martin told Kade that evening as he helped her unload flour from the wagon. "Paid for 2 weeks in coin. Asked for no meals, no company, just the room." "I do not think she has slept in a long time." Kade said nothing, but his eyes drifted toward the upstairs window where the curtain never moved. He saw her again 3 days later. She walked to the stables behind the church, not for a horse, but to sit on an empty crate near the far stall. She did not speak to anyone. She did not do anything. She just sat, eyes fixed on the ground as if she was waiting for the earth to take her. Kade walked by slow, leading his sorrel gelding. He glanced at her, but she gave no sign she noticed. He passed her again the next day and the next. Every time she was there. Every time she never looked up. On the 6th day he stopped. "You know," he said, voice low and even, "it is a good horse stall but a bad place to hide." She did not answer. He leaned on the rail. "You ain't from anywhere near here." Still nothing. "I grew up near Deer Lodge. Spent time down in Wyoming, worked cattle out near Cheyenne. I know the look of someone running from a place." Her hands twitched in her lap. He caught it. "I will be here tomorrow," he said, stepping away. Same time, and he was. For 2 weeks he came. He never pressed her, never asked her name. He sat nearby some days, quiet as a rock. Other times he talked about nothing, how the creek had risen, how the church roof leaked, how the blacksmith's dog had treed a raccoon and would not come down. She never answered. But on the 15th day her hand moved, just a little. She tugged at her sleeve as if to fix it, and that was when Kade saw it, a scar, faint, pale but wide, like a burn. It ran from her wrist and disappeared beneath the sleeve. He did not ask that night, Mrs. Martin found him outside the boarding house, sharpening his knife on the porch rail. "She had a nightmare," the older woman said quietly. "Woke up screaming. Took me 10 minutes to get her to come back inside. She will not say what happened, but she was married. Young. Too young." Kade's jaw tightened. Mrs. Martin hesitated, then added, "Her husband is dead." She did not say how. The next morning, Odessa was not at the stable. Kade found her instead out past the edge of town, sitting beneath a dying cottonwood near the creek. Her bag was beside her, packed. Her boots were muddy, her dress torn near the hem. "I thought about leaving," she said without looking at him. He crouched beside her. "Where would you go?" She shrugged. "Somewhere without people." He sat down slowly, a few feet away. "I had a brother," she said, voice brittle. "He died in the war. Then my father drank himself to death. A neighbor he offered to marry me, said I was too young, but he would take care of me. I was 16. Kade did not move. "He hit me the first time a week after. He burned me the second time, locked me in the cellar when I tried to run. I got out 2 years later. I waited until he passed out in the barn and I ran and I did not look back." Her hands clenched. "I do not want anyone to see me. I do not want to be seen." Kade did not speak. She turned her head just slightly, and for the first time her eyes flicked to his. It was only a second, but she looked at him, and he was still there. "I am not going anywhere," he said. She looked away again, but her voice cracked. "Why? Because you need someone to wait, and I can." She let out a shaky breath. "You do not even know me." "I know you are still here." "That is enough for now." She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood. "I need to go back. I left the window open." He stood too. "Let me walk you." She hesitated, then nodded once. They walked slow. She did not speak again, but she did not flinch when his arm brushed hers. And for the first time, he saw her eyes again, just a glance, just enough. But it was the beginning. The summer deepened. Heat settled into the valley like breath held too long, and the creek dropped low enough to show its stony bed. Odessa began walking in the early mornings, when the air still held a trace of cool and the town hadn't yet stirred. She kept to the edges behind the livery, through the cottonwoods, past the old stone foundation where a fire had taken the mercantile 2 winters ago. She didn't speak if someone passed her, but she didn't turn away anymore. Kade saw her most mornings, never by accident. He saddled his horse before dawn and rode the ridge, circling back in time to dismount near the churchyard just as she passed. He didn't greet her outright. Just nodded once, as if they were two people who'd known each other from before, and the silence between them was something settled, not empty. One morning she stopped when he did. "You still riding fence up by the south pasture?" she asked, her voice rough with disuse. He looked over, surprised by the sound of it. "Every other day." "Is the sorrel yours?" Raised him from a colt. She nodded once and kept walking. That was all. The next time she asked, "What do you carry in the saddlebag?" Kade rubbed the back of his neck. "Coffee, salt, a tin of beans." "Flint and steel, pocket Bible I haven't opened in 4 years." She glanced down at her hands. "You believe in God?" "I believe in weather and horses and keeping your word." That made her pause, not from offense. Just something unreadable behind her eyes, like she was trying to recall the shape of a word she hadn't spoken in years. Later that week, she came to the smithy with a pair of boots slung over her shoulder. The soles were cracked. The laces had gone stiff. She waited her turn behind 3 men and didn't speak until the blacksmith noticed her. As she left, Kade stepped from the alley beside the apothecary, wiping sweat from his brow. "Those yours?" "No," she said. "A boy left them on the boarding house step, no note." "Just the boots. You planning to keep them?" "They're too small." He studied her a moment. "You keep them anyway." "I thought maybe someone would come back for them." He didn't ask why she sounded like she already knew no one would. A week passed, then another. Kade didn't press her to talk. But bit by bit, the distance she kept started to shift. She sat on the bench near the well while children ran past, and didn't flinch when dust hit her hem. She helped Mrs. Martin carry water upstairs, and once stayed at the church long enough to hear the end of a hymn from the open doors. She never sang, but she lingered. Kade brought her a peach once, not because it was ripe or sweet it wasn't, but because he knew she hadn't had one in weeks. He handed it to her without a word. She took it without thanks, ate it slow. Then said, almost too low to hear, "I used to climb the neighbor's tree for these. Got caught once, told him the wind blew me up there." He didn't laugh, just said, "Did he believe you?" "No, but he let me keep the peach." She handed Kade the pit and walked away. That night, he found himself carving the pit down to its center, not for any reason, just to see what was inside. Toward the end of August, she came to the pasture. Kade was mending a break in the fence. She didn't announce herself, just stepped over the low rail and stood quiet, arms folded. "I didn't think you'd come out this far," he said. "I didn't either." He straightened, wiped his hands on his trousers. "You looking for something?" "No," she said. "I just wanted to see how far I could go." He nodded once, then pointed to the line of mountains in the far west. "That's the Bitterroots. You can ride 3 days and still not reach the base." She studied the horizon. "You ever think about leaving?" "I did. Then I didn't." "Why not?" He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes you stay not because the place is good, but because you're not ready to start over." She didn't look at him. "And sometimes you stay because someone waited." He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just stood beside her as the wind moved through the grass. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone. That evening, she brought him a piece of bread folded in a linen scrap, still warm. She didn't say where it came from. He didn't ask. They sat on the porch steps of the boarding house while the sun dipped low and the first stars came out. She leaned her shoulder against the frame of the door, and for the first time, she stayed even after the town went quiet. Kade didn't leave either. And when she finally looked at him, really looked, he didn't look away. He just said, "I'm still here." And she whispered, "I know." By September, the wind carried a bite. Not sharp like winter, but enough that Odessa wrapped her shawl tighter and began braiding her hair in the mornings, the loose strands too easily caught by the breeze. The cottonwoods yellowed fast that year, and their leaves clung to the branches like they, too, were unsure if they could let go. Kade found her in the church garden one afternoon, crouched beside the row of late beans that had somehow dodged the first frost. She didn't notice him at first. Her fingers moved through the vines with quiet purpose, twisting the stems gently, checking for rot. "You planting next season?" he asked. She didn't startle. "Mrs. Martin said the soil here's tired, needs resting, but I thought maybe turn in some ash, see if it helps." He leaned on the fence. "You know about soil?" "A little. My mother kept a garden behind our cabin. I remember more than I thought I would. You miss her. She died before I could tell if I liked her." She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "But she taught me how to tell when carrots are ready without pulling them." Kade watched her hands as she tied the ends of her braid together, her fingers quick and sure. "You ever think about having your own plot somewhere?" She glanced up at him, then away again. "I used to think I would. You still could." She didn't answer, but she didn't fold into herself the way she used to when things pressed too close. That Sunday, she walked into the church just before the bell rang. Her boots were clean. She sat on the second-to-last bench, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floorboards. When the preacher read from the Psalms, she didn't lift her head, but she stayed until the final hymn. Afterward, Kade waited outside by the gate. She stepped out into the sunlight, blinking like it surprised her to see it. "I didn't think you came to services," she said. "I don't. But I figured if someone was brave enough to come in, I'd better be here when they came out." She looked at him then, not briefly, but long enough that he saw the pale ring around her irises. "I don't need looking after." "I know," he said. "Doesn't mean I won't." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture new between them. "You always this steady?" "Only when it matters." The next week, she knocked on the barn wall while he was repairing the loft ladder. He didn't hear her at first, but when he looked down, she was standing with a basket hooked over her arm. "I made biscuits. Don't ask if they're sweet, they're not." He climbed down, wiping sawdust from his hands. "I wasn't going to ask. I put lard in them." "That's all I had." He took one, still warm. She didn't wait to see if he liked it, just set the basket on a barrel and turned to leave. He chewed slowly, then called out, "You ever think about moving out of the boarding house?" She paused, her back to him. "Sometimes." He stepped closer. "I've got a place, bit of land west of town. No one's there but me." She didn't turn. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because I'd rather ask you honest than wait and wonder if you'll ever want something more." She turned then, not with fear, but with something cautious and open all at once. "You think I'm ready for that? I think you know your own mind." She stepped back toward the basket, her eyes on the barn wall. "I'd want to do things slow. I'd want my own room at first." He didn't interrupt. "I'd want to cook my own meals. And I'd want to choose when I talk and when I don't." "All right." She looked up at him, really and fully for the first time without flinching. "And I'd want your word that if I ever needed to walk away, you'd let me." Kade studied her face. "You'd have it." "But you won't need it." Her jaw trembled once, then steadied. "Then I'll come, not today, but soon," he nodded. "I'll be there, Odessa." She nodded back only once, but it was the kind of nod that closed a door behind her and opened another ahead. That night, she returned to the boarding house and folded her shawl over the foot of her bed like it belonged to a place she wouldn't need for long. The window was shut against the wind, but she left it unlatched, and when she slept, her hands didn't stay clenched. By the time the first snow settled in the shadows between buildings, Odessa had moved her things into the small room above Kade's kitchen. She carried the basket herself. No one helped. Kade had left the door open and the hearth lit and said nothing when she stepped inside and closed it behind her. They lived quiet. She kept her own space, cooked what she wanted, stacked her books in a line along the windowsill. Kade gave her the mornings, took his horse out before light and came back with his coat dusted in frost and his hands smelling of leather and pine. She never asked where he went. He never asked what she dreamed. One evening, she sat cross-legged on the floor, patching a tear in her sleeve while Kade mended a bridle strap at the table. Outside, the wind dragged dry leaves across the porch. "You ever think of marrying again?" she asked, threading her needle through thick cotton. Kade's hands stilled. "No, you against it?" "No," she tied off the stitch, keeping her eyes on the fabric. "I wouldn't want a preacher. I wouldn't ask for one. I wouldn't wear white. Wouldn't expect you to." She looked up from her sewing, the lamp catching the edge of her cheek. "If I said I might want that someday, not now, maybe not soon, but someday." "Would that be enough for you to stay?" Kade leaned back, the bridle forgotten in his lap. "I already stayed." She set her mending aside. "Most men wouldn't wait. I'm not most men." She rose, crossed the room slow, and stopped beside his chair. "Then I'll say it plain, I want to be yours. Not with papers or rings, just here, like this." Kade stood, close enough to feel her breath. "That's all I ever wanted." She rested her forehead against his collarbone, and he wrapped his arms around her without pulling her in too tight. She stayed like that until the fire burned low. Later, she asked if he'd show her how to saddle a horse, not because she meant to go anywhere, but because she'd never done it herself. So the next morning, he led her to the lean-to and stood back while she fumbled with the cinch. She cursed when she got the strap twisted. He didn't laugh. "You're not correcting me," she said, trying again. "You'll learn faster if I don't." She glanced back. "You always teach this way?" "Only to people I trust." That night, she unrolled a faded map across the table and pointed to a spot near the river bend. "There's a place I used to go before." "Everything? I'd like to see it again." "We'll ride out tomorrow." She hesitated. "I want to go alone," he nodded. "I'll wait here. I won't be long." "I know." She left before dawn, bundled against the wind, her braid tucked into her collar. She took the sorrel. He watched from the porch until she disappeared into the trees. She came back before dusk. Her cheeks were red from the cold and her gloves damp with snowmelt. She didn't speak when she stepped through the door, just went to the hearth, warmed her hands, and then turned. "I buried something there," she said, voice low. "A ribbon from when I was a girl. I thought it'd be gone, but I found it under the stones." Kade stepped closer. "You want to keep it?" "No, I just wanted to remember I'd had it." He reached for her hand, rough palm curling around her fingers. She didn't pull away. "I'm not scared anymore," she said. "You don't have to be. I still wake up sometimes and forget where I am. I'll remind you." She leaned into him, slow and easy, and rested her head beneath his chin. "You always feel this solid, only when you're near." That night, she moved her blankets to his bed. No words, no questions, just a quiet decision, as sure as the snow outside. And when they lay side by side, her hand found his without searching. She didn't look away. The snow deepened by December, blanketing the pasture fence posts and softening the sound of every step. Odessa stood at the window most mornings, steam rising from her cup, gaze following the hush of flakes landing on the eaves. She wasn't watching for anything. Just listening, maybe, to the quiet her life had never allowed before. Kade came in one afternoon with his coat stiff from cold and a bundle wrapped in oilcloth beneath his arm. He set it on the table without saying much, shook the frost from his hat, and poured water to boil. Odessa waited until he'd hung his coat and sat before she touched the bundle. Inside, she found folded wool thick, dark green, finely stitched. A cloak, heavier than her shawl, with a row of carved bone buttons shaped like leaves. "I traded for it with Wren Holloway," he said, rubbing his hands. "She made it for her sister, but the girl moved south and never came for it." Odessa ran her fingers over the lining. "It's too fine." He looked over at her. "So are you." She fastened the top button and stepped out into the yard just before dusk. The snow had stopped and the moonlight turned the trees to silver. Kade joined her, arms folded, boots crunching beside hers. "I want to build something," she said after a long while. He turned toward her. "What kind of something?" "A greenhouse. Small, nothing fancy. Just enough to grow herbs through winter, maybe some roots. I remember how to make glass panes from sand and ash if I can find the right kind of clay for molds." He nodded. "We can start soon. Ground's hard, but I've got timber stored that hasn't warped." She glanced at him sidelong. "You always keep wood waiting." "I like being ready." She said nothing to that, only took his hand, her glove cool against his palm. Inside, she spread a sheet of parchment across the table and began to sketch in charcoal. He watched her draw the slope of the roof, the placement of the shelving, the orientation for the best light. She didn't ask for approval. She just explained what she knew, and he listened. Later, while she folded the parchment and tucked it beneath a stack of needles and twine, she said, "I used to think I'd never build anything again, not with someone else." Kade leaned back in his chair. "What changed? You didn't ask me to." He studied her for a moment, then reached into the small drawer near the hearth and pulled out a narrow box carved from birch. "I didn't know when to give you this," he said, setting it in front of her. "But I've known for a while." She opened the lid slowly. Inside lay a silver hairpin set with a single piece of smoky quartz polished smooth. She touched it as though it might vanish. "You said you wouldn't give me a ring." "I won't," he said. "But I figured you'd wear this." She ran her thumb along the edge of the stone. "It's the color of the creek in March." "I thought so." She turned toward him, her voice low. "I don't want to be a wife in the way folks mean it. Not someone who takes a man's name and disappears behind it. You never will be. I want my own name on the deed. If we build something, it's ours, both of us." He reached for her hand. "I'll sign it with you." She nodded, and for a long time neither spoke. The fire cracked. Wind scratched along the eaves. Her fingers tightened around the hairpin. "I've never been loved without being owned," she said. "You're not owned," he answered. "You're free. And I love you for staying." That night they lay together with the quilt pulled high and their hands clasped between them. She didn't wake from any dreams. He didn't stir at every creak of the walls. The house, for the first time, felt still. By early spring, the greenhouse rose behind the barn. Odessa mixed ash and sand as she'd learned years ago, while Kade framed the walls and laid stone for the base. The panes were uneven, some clouded, some clear, but they held against the wind. She planted chamomile first, then sage, then a row of carrots she wasn't sure would take. One morning she stepped outside to find a cedar sign planted in the ground beside the door. It read, "Odessa's Garden." She didn't say anything, just ran her fingers over the grain, then turned toward him. "You spelled it right," he shrugged. "Didn't want to risk getting on your bad side." She kissed him against the doorframe, slow and full. "You never were." When the carrots bloomed in mid-June, she pulled the first one gently, brushed the dirt from its root, and handed it to Kade like a promise. He bit into it, grinned at the taste, then handed her the other half. They ate it together, leaning against the greenhouse wall, sun warm on their backs, the scent of earth thick between them. That summer they didn't leave Red Elk Crossing. They didn't need to. The house was full of light. The garden grew. And every morning she woke with her hand in his, knowing it would stay that way always.